I'm bouncing off it.
Yes, come closer.
Now I see three.
Oh,
I
yes,
see
come
it.
visit us.
I kind of yelled out to my brother. I said, let's move away from the shore. And I collapsed on the sand. I had no use of my legs. I couldn't coordinate my legs. I couldn't get them to I couldn't move my legs under me to pick myself up. And this lasted roughly about 45 seconds. My brother had the same effect, roughly about 5 seconds later, as he tried to pull me up off the sand. At the time, we had built a recreational vehicle, retrofitted it as a laboratory, fitted it with various different instrumentation. We also heard that Avi Loeb from Harvard University was putting together a group called the Galileo Project. Radar equipment, which we established early on, radar detection. We underwent a two-year study.
First part of this project was we wanted first part of the effort was to determine what prosaics would look like: aircraft, birds, biomass, insects, bats, that sort of thing.
Developing out and securing equipment that we could better observe these objects because of their nature and low light, luminosity, that sort of thing. So we ended up securing night vision equipment, hyperspectral cameras, and that sort of thing in order to visualize what was going on there.
The following is a conversation with John and Gerald Tedesco, the brothers behind the Eye on the Sky project, also known as Nightcrawler, a research project conducted off the coast of Long Island, New York. Now they've worked with the Galileo project and have published reports to scientific research and academic publishers. We often say in ufology that it's made up of too many trust me bros and not enough credentialed people who look at the subject with a scientific approach and using the top of the range tech. Well, these brothers and their associates show us that is simply not the case, that this team uses the best technology and they have the best credentials and they have captured some of the best footage using a data-driven approach and publishing their findings in a scientific fashion. Now, John is an incredibly credentialed person. He was a laboratory engineer in instrumentation, safety testing, electrical and electronics engineering with master's degrees. Gerald is also an engineer, 2 bachelors in public health. He's worked in forensic science, then switched over to electrical, mechanical engineering, and worked within surveillance for aerospace and aviation. Throughout this episode, John and Gerald will share their process of ruling out conventional explanations through detailed investigation. Their toolkit includes things like radar, high zoom optics, hyperspectral imaging, FLIR forward-looking infrared cameras, thermal sensors, acoustic detectors, infrasound equipment, and other advanced technology. In this episode, we will look at some of their incredible footage and listen to what they have found so far. And it is really, really compelling stuff. So, the following is a conversation with John and Gerald Tedesco. John and Gerald, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate your time. And if it's okay with you, I'd really like to jump in and just get an idea of how the concept kind of came to life, really. Where did it start?
Sure. Gerald, you want to lead that on that one?
You have to excuse my my speech. So I developed a virus similar to Bell's palsy, and it weakened some of the muscles on one side of my face. So you might notice that
Yeah, no problem.
I'm a little tilted in my mouth.
It looks like slice along.
Yeah. John, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. All right. So this started basically with the ODNI report. What we ended up doing was at the time we had built a recreational vehicle, retrofitted it as a laboratory, fitted it with various different instrumentation, equipment to do an environmental study, environmental survey on electrosmog, on EMI emissions. And at that time, we also heard that Avi Loeb from Harvard University was putting together a group called the Galileo Project to study UAPs, UFOs, the vernacular, and we were interested in it, so we presented our ideas with him and our mobile approach. And Avi was interested in what we had, and what we ended up doing was joining the group as affiliates. We were welcome aboard, and we had spent 2 years with them, helping develop their platform and so forth. Their platform remained fixed. It was a fixed system of instrumentation, and monitoring equipment, and in our case, it was retrofitted on a laboratory on a mobile platform that we could move, from location to location, especially around by the coast where we are on Long Island. And we had gone from radar equipment, which we established early on, radar detection, which we had to get FCC licensing for. And we had also secured the permits for the Parks Department here on the island. So, we could secure the location as well. And we underwent a two-year study and research, basically trying to understand what was over Long Island's coastline. And we had quite a few reports that we were addressing at the time, and orb-like lighting that people see in the sky and so forth. And we had basically went from that point of view, and it was a learning experience for us, from taking on some of the earlier reports and retrospective data, and developing out and securing equipment that we could better observe these objects because of their nature and low light, luminosity, that sort of thing. So we ended up securing night vision equipment, hyperspectral cameras, and that sort of thing in order to visualize what was going on there.
And I should mention that the first part of this project was we wanted the first part of the effort was to determine what prosaics would look like: aircraft, birds, biomass, insects, bats, that sort of thing. So we spent the first 3 to 4 months identifying prosaics, narrowing them down, and developed a methodology for that. And then of course, equipment evolved too.
Right. And that was a large part of the report as well. The project that we were undertaking is that we wanted to eliminate those prosaics early on. We wanted to identify commercial traffic, air traffic, and so forth, which was could be complicated, because we do live next to some large airports, especially JFK, John F. Kennedy, and which is a large municipal airport over there, which is about 35 miles from our location. So we certainly wanted to look at the flight traffic and of course what flights were active during that period of time in the sky, what we could see after a certain period of time, generally after around 12:30 at night, which traffic kind of settled down. And we use various different applications and programs to determine whether or not there was commercial traffic that was interfering with what we were observing. And we used ADS-B for that. We used maritime apps, to look at maritime traffic and that sort of thing. So we were very careful as far as what it was that we were trying to qualify as anomalous. It's
incredible. So, how did you decide what? I mean, because it seems like you guys are very pioneers in this. Essentially, how do you know which sensors to use? Because you would assume that a lot of the sensors or the data around tracking would be classified stuff. It's the military, it's the intelligence community that potentially looking at this stuff. So when you're going out there going, right, are we going to use radar? Are we going to use night vision? How do you sort of make the decision on what to use and what to sort of focus on?
Well, the first thing we looked at is As far as air traffic, the first we know we needed radar, a system radar, and what we have is a proprietary radar system. We use an active radar, but we have two radars on top of the vehicle. One's horizontal, one's vertical, and we would do vertical, the vertical sweeps and horizontal sweeps, so we can get elevation, we can get azimuth, and we can get also a better cross section of the objects. And this of course is proprietary for our system. We also started to use a secondary, what's called millimeter wave radar, which it creates a Doppler effect or a Doppler shift in sounds, as if an object moves towards you, away from you, or crosses the path. So we're using that as detection, and then we're using the hyperspectral equipment, everything from visible to near infrared to shortwave infrared to longwave infrared, and also UV cameras and UV sensors that would detect, let's say, these things. If you created a plasma, some kind of plasma, it would trigger. If a corona discharge, it could trigger the UV sensor. So that would be detected. So we use that as the form of detection, and all the other equipment, most of the hyperspectral equipment and the Geiger counters and spectrum analyzers, was a secondary system, so we can further identify what we were looking at. But it was the radar and the night vision cameras, and that would determine, of course, the air traffic. We knew what the navigation lights looked like. We knew what the anti-collision beacons, all that kind of thing. We also had zoom modes on the cameras, 60 to 120 times. So an object that was a dot, and we can zoom in on, see clearly see navigation lights and the actual configuration of the aircraft.
And we also use stellarium mapping programs as well. Look at this, the star constellations and so forth. So we want to do isolate that as a prosaic. Some of the stuff that does the stars do look like objects close to the water, over the horizon, especially in an area that has low light pollution like that. So you end up seeing these things. Again, like Gerald pointed out, that the radar was a key element to that scanning in both the two types of geometries. One is a horizontal scan, 360 degrees, and we also swept the sky in a vertical scan as well. And that would give us roughly about 50,000 feet of altitude. So we could sweep pretty high, and about roughly about 20 miles out at sea with the horizontal scan. We'd line these objects up with the ADS-B data, and basically check them off, as prosaics. Anything that was left, of course, came into question, and that's the reason for the hyperspectral equipment, the hyperspectral cameras, the thermal vision and that sort of thing, is that we wanted to see what kind of signatures these things would leave behind, and we had quad view systems in order to visualize that. So you'd have 4 cameras running at the same time, and in a quad view arrangement, and that quad view arrangement, we can make those side by side comparisons, and basically isolate that as a form of whether or not it was anomalous or was something else that that was man-made.
You had some fascinating results. I'm really interested in some of the detail from what you've seen. So how many of what percentage was sort of that you observed was outside of the visual spectrum? Because I'm really interested in what might be there in plain sight, if you like.
Well, we probably collected 40 to 50 videos of objects that were very highly anomalous, that wouldn't match the prosaics, and these were all outliers. And of course, some of them are pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and they of course, that's over a 2-year period.
Yeah,
of doing it.
Yeah, it would happen. These things would come out randomly. Most of these things were orb-like objects that we would see that would suddenly appear, disappear. They would loiter along the shoreline, and this would happen after the air traffic would even come to a close. After like midnight, most of the air traffic stops. There's also we mapped out the flight corridor, so this was away from the flight corridor. That was the other thing that happened. These objects, and they would just appear out there, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in clusters, but they were very extremely bizarre looking, and the behaviors were very strange.
Yeah, and I would say about 15% of the overall sightings were anomalous.
Mhm.
Out of what was being observed, what was being detected, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
That's fascinating. I mean, it only takes one to make the whole thing worth
Sure.
investigating, doesn't it?
Exactly.
But
Mhm.
and this it seems that the objects that you've recorded it seem to be historically involved with sort of air shows and aircraft. Like there's footage of a very similar object to one that you've captured on Concorde's first flight, and lots of air displays.
Mhm.
Did you notice that the objects were um, shadowing the aircraft, or at least interested them in any way, or were they just occupying the same space?
That's what we believe, that
Yeah.
they were seemed to find themselves in the flight paths of these aircraft, and we observed at least two, and recorded that data. And I live roughly about 15 miles from the site that we do the research, and where my home is. And even from my home, I observed several flights that seem to have some odd characteristic of objects following them, which I thought was quite bizarre. So it seems to be on a somewhat regular basis that this is occurring. And we, of course, we've heard the reports from certain passengers, and that would basically be recording some of these objects. So I heard there was two at LaGuardia Airport, and I believe one at Kennedy as well. Uh, s- you know, um, Cylindrical looking objects moving past the plane, or in the flight path. We've recorded at least two of those. But this is something that we've also tried to keep our eye on as well. We'd look at the active traffic, and we'd focus our cameras on the active traffic to see how, if this was occurring on a somewhat regular basis. And also, of course, our scans out there, our radar scans, to basically isolate whether or not it's normal air traffic, or it's something else that's in the mix, which we have detected with our scans, with our radar scans. It's been ongoing, and like I said, we've heard various different reports from people and so forth, that there have been aircraft out there, and even pilots describing objects that they have seen over the waterway, which is roughly in our backyard, where we're doing the research. So there is some collaboration there,
Yeah.
as far as what
Confirmation.
we're seeing.
Mhm.
Confirmation, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know you were describing the sort of geometric shapes within a sphere, the similar things to Ryan Graves was
Sure.
describing. But there was one of your cases that you where you tracked an object with the lidar, I mean, you'll have to forgive me, I'm no scientist, but when David Fravor was having his encounter, he said that it appeared he was being actively jammed, in that the returns to his gun camera, the IR, were giving him false figures. And I believe you said that it was the distance that the lidar was reflecting was.
Yes. Yes, yes. Interestingly enough, this happened in several cases, that we were using LiDAR in combination with an IR emitter. So we'll be shooting out an invisible infrared beam out there, and which is roughly about the spot size is roughly about 12 millimeters, and we'll track it with the hyperspectral cameras, the night vision cameras. And one day, while we were actually, like I said, it happened in three cases. The one night in particular, that I believe the video that you're talking about, we were down by the path. There's a cut down going down to the water, and we had spotted this object that seemed odd. It had odd behavior, flight behavior, and it seemed to be almost like a polyhedron of some sort, a rotating polyhedron, in the NV goggles. So what I ended up doing was basically transmitting a lidar beam out there, and trying to strike it, trying to get some kind of a distance measurement on it. And in a couple of the cases, when I actually hit the object, it toned out. I had a clear line of sight. in my field of view. And I got back some odd measurements that would be no more than roughly about 50 feet. I had one measurement that came back as 46 feet, and which didn't make much sense to me. But I knew, I was hitting the object. There was nothing in my path. So I thought that that needed some explanation why something like that would occur. And like you said, maybe it is a form of blocking or avoiding the beam of light in some way, or
Some
even kind of
jamming.
yes, or something, jamming, or even some kind of gravitational lensing of some sort. Um, uh, Also, we had an incident that occurred in August in 2022, where we were on the beach and we saw an object that triangular formation out there that we were basically transmitting an EM signal out there, an IR signal. I'm sorry, and the IR signal was bouncing off an object that seemed to be directly in front of us and in front of the triangle. And after hitting this object 5 or 6 times, we noticed the object, that beam of light, which was at a flash rate of 1 second, which is basically the flash rate of the rangefinder in the optics. And it appeared as though this object had moved very suddenly toward the shore. And I watched this object every 1 second flash get closer and closer, and within about 2 seconds, it was literally on top of us. And I believe it was reflecting back our beam at that point. So we did have some physical issues with that as well. And I had basically turned at that point to get away from the shoreline, and I kind of yelled out to my brother. I said, let's move away from the shore. And I collapsed on the sand. I had no use of my legs. I couldn't coordinate my legs. I couldn't get them to I couldn't move my legs under me to pick myself up. And this lasted roughly about 45 seconds. My brother had the same effect, roughly about 5 seconds later, as he tried to pull me up off the sand. So we have no idea what that was. And even today, we can't quite wrap our heads around it.
It was like a loss of muscle tone below the waist. No muscle strength, no muscle tone. And like says it, I know we attributed to some kind of threat assessment that was made of, because it looked like whatever this light was, it also it somehow entered the optics of John's camera. And it actually got beyond the iris, and it was doing things inside the camera. The camera actually recorded a piece of a clip of this.
Yeah, and this was an unusual physical error in the physical failure to the camera. I used to repair cameras a number of years ago. I was a service technician for cameras and optics and that sort of thing, and it's very odd to me that what we had seen in the display in the optics was a large or an intense form of light that had somehow gotten beyond the iris system, the shutter in the iris, with the iris motor controls the internal shutter, the iris, and it seemed to have overloaded the optics of the camera. So I'm not quite sure how that could have happened. With further examination, you also determined that some of the macro settings in the camera were electronically altered, where the camera needed a complete reset and a reinitialization in order to get those settings back. So that was bizarre. I normally see that kind of stuff after an electrical storm, where you go to in my case, it was a customer's house, whether it was a television or a video product of some sort. And after an electrical storm, they'd say that, the parameters weren't quite right on their electronics. And I would find that the electrical discharge, or the EMI that was developed by lightning, would actually interfere or reset some of these settings, or clear out some of these settings, these memory settings. So that's just similar to what we had down there.
And the other thing I should say is in that video clip we have, you actually hear mechanical clicking inside with the camera. You hear a mechanical manipulation of some of the components inside the camera.
Right,
Wow,
right,
this
and
is extraordinary.
yeah,
And we had three cameras that were affected by EMI. There was some strong electromagnetic interference. And in fact, one camera completely failed.
right,
Wow.
and two of the cameras had to be reinitialized.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I've heard of. I mean, not for a second am I saying, oh, it's Russian, but I know Russia explored as a means of stealth using plasma fields and these orbs. It's been mentioned that the orbs may be plasma related. So would that be any possible byproduct of a close proximity to a plasma?
It's a possibility because we have a UVC detection system. It's binary and it's a very sensitive discharge with gas tube, a gas sensor. The gas sensor is very sensitive to a specific wavelength of UV, which is they classify as the C band or the C range. The C range is anywhere from 140 to about 200 nanometers. And in a couple of cases, we actually detected a large quantity of this that was triggering the sensor and giving us basically a UVC indication, which can only come from possibly a plasma or a discharge, an arc, electrical arc, or some kind of a UVC discharge, even from a flame that can produce UVC radiation. And it's just like I said, the system that we use is very sensitive. There's a specific company that we purchase it from, and you can light a cigarette lighter, roughly about a half a mile away. And this detector will be triggered by that flame.
Actually, just the
So
arc that will trigger it.
Right.
And to say this is used for the sensor itself is used in forest fires. It's used by aircraft that actually have to find a forest fire.
Right.
And it's used mostly by the military uses this particular type of sensor. The other thing is when this particular UV sensor is triggered, we had an orb of light that was passing along the shoreline. It was highly luminous. So we had set the sensor up to see if there was a possibility of a plasma discharge. And it actually triggered the UV sensor 3 times. Wow. As it passed. So our suspicion was possible plasma discharge or
possible, yeah. Or a corona discharge, possibly a corona discharge.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed any? I mean, you mentioned before that sort of experience, but have you noticed that any sort of connections at all in any of these incidents? I mean, I've seen you talking before about one of the objects potentially being almost playful. Any kind of connection.
That happened.
A
couple of times.
We noticed the behavior and awareness of us being there, and actually almost a playful nature. Like there was one video we took of an object, or actually John had with this video taking this video as he was setting up the hyperspectral camera equipment. Is we called it the peekaboo orb. It would peek behind a sign 4 times, and every time John would try to focus in on it, would move behind the sign.
Right, and as I moved the camera away, the object would come back out, and I would swing the camera back around. It would move right back behind the sign again. And wasn't quite sure what distance it was from the camera, but I don't believe it was any more than maybe 25 yards.
Yeah, this was an intense orb of light.
Right.
Was that visible, like optically visible, or was it only visible on your camera? I know that you'd said that you'd spotted it on the camera, but
right, it was invisible in the as far as for your eyeballs. I mean, you couldn't see it. It wasn't visible light. It was only in the optics. Because as I was setting up the camera, I didn't notice that there was anything out there until I looked into the viewfinder and I saw this orb of light. And every time I looked down, I said, that's kind of bizarre, so I moved the camera in that direction and I'd look up, I wouldn't see it. And then this object would move back behind the sign. And as I moved the camera back again, the object apparently came out. I looked back in the viewfinder, I could see the object again. I moved the camera back to the right, and then of course the object would try to avoid or evade the camera. And that's not the first time. I mean, we've had other objects in it. There was another area of Robert Moses, that area, that park area that we were surveying, an area called Democrat Point, and we had objects out there that were roughly about 400 meters from where I was standing. And I had NV night vision cameras on it, focused on it. And whenever I zoomed in to try to look at these objects would suddenly disappear. And it's I'd move from one object to the other, and you'd see them, one after another, they would disappear, almost as though they were somehow knew I was trying to focus in on them, with the optical systems. So that was unusual, very unusual, but like I said, it's happened time to time. And quite recently, within the last month, Gerald and I were out there, and it was roughly about 2:30 in the morning, Gerald. We had an orb of light.
I think it was more like, I think it was like 12:30. Yeah, more like
12:30. And
Yeah.
and I had been looking out the front windshield of the RV, the mobile lab, and I saw a bright, almost like somebody had a flashlight looking into the window. So as I tried to mention it to my brother, he said, "Oh, there's something on the camera," and it was an orb of light. It was a round orb of light that I guess descended and then moved quickly, out of camera view. It occurred at the exact same time that I saw this that almost looked like what I described as some kind of a flashlight, a bright beam through the front windshield of the vehicle.
And I should say that the camera that I saw it on, we have a PTZ camera that sits on top of the vehicle. So whatever this object was, it descended in front of the PTZ camera and dropped in front of the windshield of the RV. And that's when John saw it. It was within a fraction of a second, a couple or maybe a second.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Do you guys still have that sense of sort of adventure? Because it feels like, even just listening to you talk about it, it feels like almost like a treasure hunt, going out in the mobile lab, and exploring. Do you still get the thrill?
Yeah, when we had those instances, it definitely is a thrill. It's but there's also a lot of hours of being patient and waiting for something to occur. I mean, there's nights that we'll be there and we won't see anything that was unusual, But then again, then you'll pick another night. We'll go down and it most of the time it seems to happen, late at night, generally after 12:30, and when air traffic's at a minimum, and we'll see this odd behavior of lights, and the colors are, they can be orange, red, blue, white, and yellow, and quite intense, and when the intensity is not there, it's very difficult to see with the eyes in the visible spectrum, and night vision is definitely necessary. And we'll see objects that seem to have, like, again, some kind of a polyhedral shape to them that rotates within the center of something else, some kind of, maybe possibly some kind of a sphere, possibly, or they're just generating light in such a way that it looks like a ball, and that's been typical over the last 2 years.
I would say, I would say when the luminosity goes up, then you see that sphere of light, a ball of light. As the luminosity drops, is when as we're observing these things, then we notice it would add some structure. That we would see this polyhedral type structure rotating, and it would rotating at various angles and various rates. And it seems like if it rotated faster, the intensity of the light would increase.
Yeah, sometimes the rotations, it's random as far as direction. Other times it seems to be synchronized to the viewer. You'll see something that looks like a rectangular, some kind of a rectangular shape that is reflecting light or giving off light, luminous energy. And you'll see this thing rotating, and never seem to change its rotation. Other times it's random where we'll see that one luminous side or possibly a second luminous side rotate behind it 180 degrees. And when it does, it goes completely dark. It's a dark object. And we've seen those as well. We've seen dark objects that without some form of light or emitted light source, you wouldn't see them with any of the cameras.
We actually had one incident where we had a torch that would shine the light at it, and we saw this one object that was kind of vague in the IR, and we went to look at that, and when we were moving the light towards that one, there was one that the light reflected off it. It obviously had a reflective surface, and it actually shot out, tried to evade the light, and actually did an arc around the light and shot off.
Right. Yeah. Very, very real high speed maneuver in order to seem to evade the beam of light that we were transmitting towards it. But we could see the reflection. That was very clear, and like I said, it's and within that beam of light, as we move the torch back and forth, we could see that object literally had moved around the object that we had been focusing on.
And this it kind of fit Lou Elizondo's claim of one of the fire observables, instantaneous acceleration. I mean, this was instantaneous. It just took off.
Oh yeah.
I got to ask a slightly less technical question. Did you notice any aspect of them reacting to your attention rather than just going in and out like a trail cam? Was there any correlation between your conscious attention and their activity?
Well, the interesting thing is there was one night we were out there, and the triangular object in August that appeared in front of the RV where we were parked, directly in front of it as we before we turned the radar, and but it just suddenly appeared there. It was after 12 midnight. We just suddenly noticed it in the IR on IR camera on the monitor inside the RV. The RV.
Right. Yeah, the central monitor, and it wasn't there when we arrived. It just seemed as we pulled up, it seemed to align itself with the path or the cut down to the beach, and we could visualize it in the monitor with the infrared cameras, but nothing through the eyes. I mean, you couldn't see any light coming back with with your eyes. There was no sound at all, and as far as we can tell, and we did have had set up a parabolic dish, an acoustic amplifier, and we were actually listening for the sounds over the water. So it wasn't so, other than, of course, the water, the waves crashing on the shore and birds and that sort of thing out there. There was nothing else that we could hear. This object, this is the second time too, because we had another object that seemed to appear in front of a cut that was in front of the RV that we can actually see visibly. And it was an object that was roughly about I would say about 600 meters out, and it was rotating over the water, casting a reflection on the water, and we could see this thing spinning up and slowing down and so forth. But the reflection was quite clear to see in the visible part of the spectrum. It also was accompanied.
You could also see it changing its elevation with the reflection on the water.
Right.
It would change its elevation. And as we watch an object, there were other objects that appeared similar, or orbs of light, but they were different spectral ranges. So the one that we were seeing was in the visible light. Then there was other ones that appeared to change in the drift into the IR range, and you couldn't see them visibly. So they appeared in different spectral ranges. So our thought was that they maybe have the ability to change their spectral range.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is that Go
Sorry,
ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, could that be an effect of like gravitational lensing then, if it's the changing colors and then sliding into IR or
That's
something like that?
that's a
Possibility also.
strong possibility, that it's actually changing its wavelength. And it may be it may be an effect of some kind of a gravitational shift around the object, um, which is changing that, that of course that color, that spectral range. Um, uh, Also, we've also had situations where we use lidar and try to hit the object with lidar with a beam, and the beam seemed to never come in contact with the object itself. It almost seemed like it was deflected around it, or but never hitting the center. Yeah, which we thought was kind of bizarre. Um, and hitting a baseball, through a six through its 10-inch hole, at a half a mile away. It was kind of bizarre.
I could listen to these cases for hours, and now this is fascinating, fascinating stuff. I should ask. Last time I had Ezra Kelderman. Do you know? I don't know if you know Ezra. He
Yes.
works on the Galileo project.
Galileo project.
Yes.
Yeah, he real cool guy. Talked to him quite frequently actually about bits and pieces. But he was on the podcast a while ago. I think he's coming on again in the future. Last time that he was on, so many people reached out to me and said, "This is fantastic. This is great. But what can I get at home? What can I use? What's sort of affordable?" Do you know if there's anything that you're aware of that? I appreciate some of the stuff is high end and real technical and therefore quite expensive. But are you aware of anything that people could use to try some of this? For example, are you finding that there's certain sensors that are a bit more affordable that sometimes pick things up that might be more affordable to the everyday person?
Well, John can probably address the fact that the cell phones actually have sensors in them. Then there's apps that you can use to actually use those sensors. John can probably comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few sensors in it. They're fairly sophisticated too. I mean, cell phones, they have magnetometers. They can measure acceleration. They have G-force sensors. They have proximity sensors. They have light sensors. And Some of these sensors are pretty accurate. I used to work in a laboratory, and we'd compare notes, and we'd actually do comparison studies between the actual sensors that we used to measure acceleration and that sort of thing. The numbers would be pretty close. There are some other applications that actually allow the CCD to be used as a Geiger counter. Where you would mask the objective lens with some dark tape, and ionizing radiation would cause a noise effect on the CCD, on the imager, and they would actually count that noise, how often it occurred, and so forth, and come up with these numbers. And these numbers would be in the general range of what you'd find on a Geiger counter. So that's something, and also the newer cameras too they're light sensitive. Some of them do have night vision specs on, and they can be used to see some of the stuff that's in the IR. There is cameras that are on the market that are specifically designed for night vision capability, mostly planetary cameras that can be purchased for inclusion on a telescope that can be put over an eyepiece. And those cameras, once they're fitted with a lens, can be used also to visualize some of the stuff that's occurring at night. They're starvis sensors. They're designed to see stars, starlight, and called starlight sensors. But the images themselves are low light sensitive, and in fact, some of them do go down to about 1100 nanometers into the infrared. Which is up, generally starts at about 850, 860 nanometers. So you can capture some of that stuff, with those particular cameras. Some people remove the cut filters from them, the IR cut filters, which are in a camera deliberately to remove that too much of that IR during the day that would make of course your photographs look red, you know. But with sensitive enough cameras, with these specific sensors, it certainly can be used that way, or a purchase of a night vision scope or night vision camera, which has become much more affordable these days. Some of the cameras we use, obviously they're a higher resolution. We're looking not just to look in the infrared, near infrared, but we're looking to look in the short wave and further on down into the long wave and the thermal end of it. So that's where the cost comes in. And but as far as stargazing or looking for something like this and in a low light setting, it can definitely get away with a $200 or $300 night vision system.
Awesome. So where would people, I mean, I'm certain that people are going to want to follow you guys a bit more as some of our viewers who might be brand new to the subject. I think that's one of the things about this sort of the subject hitting Congress, in the next month or so, and there's so many new people that come in at the time that are like, where do I go for this? Where do I go for what's the Galileo project? And like, we've heard of the Galileo project, we've been hearing about it for quite some time, but people that are just coming onto it go, well, what's this? Where would be the best place for people to come and find you and to follow your work? And I know that you guys have been around for quite a while. You've got, you've published papers, you've got your book, and what would be the best place? You've got a website?
Yes, we do have a website that's right now we have a lot of stuff that we've been posting on. It's a Facebook website for social media. It's called Nightcrawler, Eye on the Sky. And if you just do a search, that'll come up, and we have lots of members on that site. We try to provide as much of the detail with the cases and the images as well on the site as sometimes interesting things as far as the instrumentation and purchasing and that sort of thing as well. So they can certainly contact us through there, and we can leave for interested parties. We can leave our contact information as well. We're not so much connected with the Galileo project at this time. This is more of an independent investigation, and we've pretty much gone our own direction. As far as finding us there, you'll see that we're still affiliates of the Galileo project, but we're doing this on an independent basis at this point.
And this has always been independent. It's been we're assisting them, but they have their approach, which they're following, and we have our mobile approach that we've been sticking to.
Right.
I've got to ask before we do wrap it up, how if you had to speculate, and I appreciate speculation at this stage, but just how ubiquitous do you think this is? Like, do you think this is limited to the areas that you've been looking because we've got a sensor bias there, or do you think this is an overview of everywhere?
We think it's more widespread. Yeah, we think it's more widespread, and we're seeing. I think it's we're seeing a lot of on the coastline, but I'm sure there's a lot of it over land as well. But I think it's because of the variance in spectral range that these things can appear. Is probably why you're not seeing it. It's not necessarily in the visible all the time.
And we think it's more of a coastal phenomena at this point. It seems to be more down to the coast. I mean, we have a lot of sightings that's been reported over Long Island, but Long Island is quite narrow. So some of these sightings, you could be looking up, in the sky, and it's actually over water that you're seeing these objects. It's they can be seen anywhere. Of course, the West Coast with Catalina Island and so forth, and there's I think the same thing is being seen all over the world, basically.
Yeah, we've got a chap on in the next couple of weeks. He's been on in the past. He's got a website, UAP Tracker. It was UAPtracker.com, and I think he's got an app now, UAPtracker.io. But it's essentially like a Google. I don't know if you know Pat, real nice guy, awesome dude. But he's literally just launched the sort of mobile app, but it's like the most real time UAP sightings tracking, like a heat map, and you just see, only in America, but you can see just so many sightings in real time.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah,
thousands.
we've been in contact with them. We've definitely talked to them.
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting, and it is a really good app. It really is.
Yeah,
You know.
superb. Super nice guy as well. Super nice guy. Well, look, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again
Thank
also
you.
for what you're doing for the subject. And it's
Absolutely.
one of these massive issues that we have is people will have photos and they have images and have stories and they'll share them, which is great. But there's very few people out there doing really technical, scientific work to really capture these and use all of the technology that's out there and available. And you guys are out there doing it, for us essentially. So I really do appreciate everything that you do for the subject. Genuinely.
Yeah,
Thank you. We certainly appreciate that,
And we
and any
appreciate
support that anybody can give to us as well. That would help us. To remain out there and further it up. With basically moving off the coast and further on down. On both shores. Which we're looking to do in the future.
funding would help. More funding.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll put some links up on the screen so people can come and find you. And
Sure.
thanks
Thank
again,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Hopefully
Thank you
we'll
for
speak
having
again
us.
soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great.
gents.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good night.
Take
Bye-bye
care.
now.
Bye now.
Take care.